Greetings, and welcome back to Tales from the Ranger's Grove. I am your teller of tales, your humble bard, Russ Johnson. Today, we start a new fantasy journey from the mind of author Chris Tomkins. Blackstone, Book 1 of the Blackstone Saga. Let's begin the journey. Chapter 1. Childhood.
We bards know our land was born in a great fire. We know it, even if the Durians dismiss our truths as myth, such is the limit of their written word. Elayna healed these lands, making rich woods of beech and oak scattered with sunlit glades. The rivers ran with sweet water, and her meadows swayed with a myriad of wild blooms. We Keats thrived on her bounty, settling in our homesteads, or spending our lives wandering the weave of trails through her forests, hills, and vales. Aye, the Keatis wilds were untamed back then. It was our sanctuary. Most of it was a vast forest between the harsh northern plateau, home to the nomadic orcs, and the dry plains. Beyond that wasteland lay civilization, the Durian Empire. Then came a town. No kid would have dreamed of such an alien concept of streets and commerce. It came into being because of the ancient monastery of the Corpus Vigilos. All that combat training and praying left no time to grow food, so the monks gave permission to a few Keatis families to live in their fertile valley, and offered their protection from orc raiding in return for a tithe of food. Those first people clustered their homes by a ford downstream from all that busy prayer. It was still only a village at that time. Then came Durian traders. Taking advantage of this westerly crossing point, they headed north to the distant Kerne hegemony. The first families even built an inn to offer these passing merchants shelter from our wild lands. Being Durian, those merchants needed a label for their maps to feed the imperial bureaucracy, so they called the place Blackstone, after the great rock that blocked the valley head. They gave it a name just as they would a dog or a horse. But Blackstone was nae just a label. It was a people whose ambition, rivalry, and inspiration gave birth to the greatest legend of our time. Folk ask me to tell them this story more than any other. Every time I have done my art proud, but I have betrayed the truth. I tell it simplified, gelded so as not to offend memories wrongly laid down. No longer. The true tale must now be heard by the flame of my fire, the whispering forest, and the insects of the night, and by the pen of me friend. Aye, I'm breaking our oral tradition to fix these facts into ink. Who will read it? I know not. I cannot meet your eye or use the nuance in me voice and see it possessed by the tale. No, I just need to be certain that the truth is made here and with the authority of one who saw myth made real. I begin the tale in the year 1165 by the Durian calendar. My scribe tells me such numbers will be important to you. To me, a year is recorded by memories, deeds, not numbers. In this year, Blackstone's fortunes broke. A few years earlier they had discovered gold, that most shameful of metals. The news of wealth seduced many Keats. They discarded Elayna's natural bounty to gather in Blackstone. Swelling with new riches, the village now became a town. What a joke Orky played on them all. The fickle spirit must have laughed when the gold ran out, leaving hopeful prospectors to starve. Wiser folk were quick to heft their hide tents onto their backs and return to the wilds. The town became a village once more, dotted with decaying roundhouses. Yet some had forgotten our ways and were terrified of returning. With too many mouths to feed and without money to bring in food from the south, Blackstone struggled with what it had. Emaciated from lack of food and pallid from loss of hope, they clung to their precarious existence. Did the monks care? Did they agree to lessen their share? No, they did not. The tithe had to be paid. They had troubles of their own. Jorwin Weaver, The Keetish Cycle.
The advancing thunderhead impaled itself on Orky's tower, mightiest of the guardian peaks, wreathing its monstrous horn in a dark cowl. Its angry cohort swept the sky either side, chasing away the failing light. The deluge of rain swelled a multitude of streams that gathered high up in Lake Brenhedi. Stricken by the storm and penned by the peaks, winds howled down the length of the mountain lake to escape into the lands below. They whipped the waters into a tumult of froth and scooped up waves that broke against a dark aberration amidst the grey-white highlands. The Blackstone glistened in a flash of lightning. Wedged between two towering summits, it made a natural dam dividing the depths of Brenhedi from the steep valley that coursed out of the mountains and into the wilds. Spray flew over its black crown and plunged down into the open space of the gorge, becoming one with the sheeting rain. At the foot of the Blackstone, the mirror-mist pool was a frenzy of splashes. Normally, the water was tranquil and veiled in a layer of vapor, because the cold lake waters became suffused with heat as they passed beneath the stone. Now it looked as if the pool was boiling. Here, where the rock walls rose high enough to trap any cry from man or beast, the sounds of the storm changed into an endless chain of echoes. Above the rain-thrashed water loomed fortified towers and walls, a crust of aging white masonry fastened to the lower face of the Blackstone. Constructed with forgotten skills, the monastery was old, older even than the Durian Empire. The weather-worn walls had seen many such storms and remained impassive. The winds caught in the gorge fought wildly to escape. They buffeted the shutters, allowing a stuttering light to spill out. Deep within, the walls muffled the elemental rage. Nevertheless, Father Elayna Skutaris felt the rumble of thunder through the stonework. Given the crisis he was facing, it could have been the foundations themselves trembling.
"This is madness,"
he accused the woman. Velesa squeezed his hand and gasped in pain as a contraction passed. She was more beautiful than the dawn, with hair spun of golden sunlight and eyes as blue as the mountain lake. "Peace, Elayna."
"This child was not of your own volition,"
he insisted fiercely.
"I may be new to understanding your purpose, yet I know that you are too important. If it is a choice between you and the child, I will intervene."
From the way the midwife avoided his gaze, he knew she was deeply troubled. She smiled weakly. "I risk more than you appreciate. My people gave me one life, not two."
"I don't understand,"
he said, fearing that he did. "I was gifted one life to sustain me through the centuries. It cannot be split in twain."
"Then let it be stillborn."
"No."
"This is not your choice. It was forced upon you. You owe this child nothing."
"This is not a transaction," she broke off and gasped through the next contraction, squeezing his hand harder. He waited. He wanted to shake her by the shoulders, but the idea alone was sacrilege. Ridiculous when he thought of the defilement committed by her attackers. Where did his duty lie?
You are the single strand that ties us back to our original purpose. Without you, why would anyone believe? I doubt I understand it myself, he admitted. You must not put this child's welfare ahead of your duty.
The weak smile returned. But my purpose is to nurture. To deny a new innocent life is to betray everything I believe in. His temper flared.
How dare you put the world in such danger?
I dare because it is my choice to make. She squeezed his hand again, this time in a gesture of comfort. A world that has no compassion will decay. The most elegant towers will fall if not built on a foundation of love. The midwife quietly reported that she could see the head. The birth was imminent. Unable to find the words to halt this disaster, Leusios felt like a lone man standing against destiny's avalanche. But conjured by who? The capricious Orky or Morsos? He shuddered and twisted his hand free of hers, looking around the room in desperation. He saw the midwife's knife she had brought to cut the cord. He stepped over to it, trembling with the enormity of what he had to do. There were more screams while the midwife murmured encouragement. Then Elayna groaned and gasped for air. "A boy," he heard the midwife say, her tone carefully neutral. No, the abbot thought. An abomination. He snatched up the knife and spun around to see her handing the still form to its mother. It was ugly, stamped with the brutal features of an orc. He pushed aside the midwife to seize the child and stopped. He lowered the knife. The crisis had passed. The child was stillborn. He barely noticed the midwife gently take the blade from his fingers. Relief made him magnanimous.
"I'm sorry."
"So am I, Leusios." She tugged the amulet around her neck. The silk cord snapped and slid free from the bluish-gray stone that had hung by her breasts. It was imperfect, covered by a speckled brown pattern that marred its depth of color. Leusios watched confused as, with loving tenderness, she pressed it into the tiny hand. She gazed at the lifeless face of the child and smiled. "He's beautiful. His name is Kerne, for he heralds all that is coming. And he is your charge. Have faith in him." She closed her eyes, and her breath left her in a single sigh. A pulse of bright white light flowed up the umbilical cord. The baby gave a jerk, and his fist closed on the amulet as Elayna's own hand slipped away. "What?" The baby screamed as he took his first breath. The abbot shrank back in horror. Disaster had befallen them all.
Can you imagine having to raise the boy you lacked the nerve to kill? I think Leusios re-witnessed his failure every dawn as he rose and saw the boy Kerne. Witnessed it and found himself guilty. He had no concept of fatherhood and treated the boy like he would a novice, demanding discipline and obedience. So, Kerne grew up, his presence tolerated as an act of duty, not of love. I never became a father, but I know from so many tales that there are only two outcomes from such strict parenting. Either the child conforms to the image of their parent, or they rebel. The fateful year of that rebellion was also the year that Elayna entered our story. Jorwin Weaver, The Keetish Cycle.
"Father? Who's that?" Elayna pointed at the teenage boy accompanying the small party of monks. She sat on the saddle in front of her father, Hal, a big, gruff man. a position she'd become accustomed to from her earliest memories. "What's wrong with his teeth?" He cuffed her hand down.
"Don't point,"
he growled, belying his own curiosity. She could tell by the way his eyes followed the line of monks that he, too, was intrigued.
"Half-orc,"
he explained.
"With warrior monks of the Corpus Vagilos. Don't give them a reason to notice you unless you want them to."
The boy was bigger than all the adult monks. A mane of thick black hair framed a face which still looked boyish, but was squared off by a powerful jaw that suited an adult better.
"Put your hood up,"
snapped one of the monks. The boy muttered something she didn't catch clearly and complied. They had arrived in the most run-down village she had ever seen, but at least they would have proper shelter. The frontier city of Lacevornum was many days behind her. A life trailing her father on campaigns had made her hardy, so she had endured the long ride up the trade road through the dry plains and great northern forest. Truly, they had passed beyond the outer limits of civilization. She had wondered at the soaring pagodas and the endless expanse of clay-tiled roofs of the Durian cities. From the rice paddies of the southern deltas to the rolling wheat fields of the north, the farmhouses of the civilized lands were brick and square.
"I've never seen huts like this,"
her father grunted as he dismounted. Without an answer, she chatted on. "They're so big and round. The roof is huge and the walls so small. They don't even have windows." He tied their horse by a post on the edge of a circular space. It was intended as a market, she decided, but only a couple of peddlers were sitting on threadbare rugs scattered with mean wares. Both were eyeing them with a predatory gaze, but they did not make a move. While her father's size and gruff manner may intimidate others, he made her feel safer than the finest forts of Duria.
"Most of the walls hidden by the angle of the roof,"
he answered as he gripped her by the waist and lifted her down.
"They're big enough for a whole family, and they hang hides from poles to separate the rooms."
"But without the windows, what do they do about lights?"
"They use rushes and beeswax candles. The winters here are too harsh for windows."
"Not oil lamps?" That was true, she realized. She'd not seen any olive groves. "Why not shutter the windows like in the south?" Her father shrugged.
"Because they've always built roundhouses this way."
"But—" She was interrupted by a cry of delight.
"Hal? Is it really you?"
The big man straightened up and cracked a rare smile through his beard. He had always been clean-shaven amongst the Durians, as was their fashion, but he'd let his beard grow longer the further north they'd come. She wasn't sure she'd like this hairier version of her father, but, looking at the few men who gathered to cast suspicious glances their way, they all grew such monstrosities with varying degrees of success. He shook his head and opened his arms.
"Murgathwin!"
Elayna saw a stiff-backed, stern-faced woman striding across the open space. She had her hair tied up into a tight bun and a simple dress made of brown linen. Elayna had lived around soldiers all her short life, and this woman's erect posture was more akin to a Durian legionary than one of the many camp followers she was used to. The woman certainly didn't flinch at her father's bare hug of an embrace.
"It's good to see you, and looking so well," he said, stepping back. "You fared better than Blackstone."
It was blatant flattery. The woman was thinner than Elayna considered healthy. Hal's last comment accompanied a critical sweep of the ramshackle huts. Many were abandoned. She pursed her lips and joined him in gazing at the picture of dilapidation and decline.
You were right, Hal. When the gold ran out, people had little reason to stay. The monastery and the caravans between Duria and Canary help keep us going, but we lose more people every year. Either they go back to try their luck with a homestead in the wilds, or—"
She nodded upstream with a grim gesture and left the sentence unfinished. Elayna understood death and the way people reacted to it. Her father had made no effort to shield her as he dragged her from fort to battlefield to siege camp. She had seen disease sweep through an army and turn the sky black with the smoke of mass funeral pyres. Murgathwin's bony hands smoothed the shoulders of his cloak as she turned the inspection back onto him.
"You're the first ever to come back. Why?"
Hal glanced down, catching Elayna's eyes. That was confusing, as he'd never given her a reason. It certainly didn't make sense. She had been fine living their old life. Murgathwin's frown, her natural expression apparently, softened, and she crouched down to her eye level.
"And what's your name?"
"Elayna, Mistress Murgathwin."
"How old are you?"
10 years last week, Mistress Murgathwin."
She picked up names quickly, and had learned that they were best used immediately and often if she was to remember them.
"You seem very sure of your dates."
"Thank you. Numbers are important, Mistress Murgathwin."
Her birthday had only been a few days ago, something that she had taken careful note of. Her father was lax about such details, not because he didn't love her. He often commented on the Durian addiction to calendars and exact dates as far too laborious. She, however, adored them. The older lady beamed up at her father.
"Manners, despite living the life of a mercenary, and old enough to help out."
She brushed a lock of Elayna's golden hair from her face.
"Pretty, too. If you stay here, you're going to be breaking a few hearts."
"She's a good worker,"
Hal confirmed. He nodded at the only stone building facing the marketplace, a 2-story construction that sprouted several rambling extensions and stores. Elayna was quick to note that, in contrast to the roundhouses, it had deep-set stone walls and many shuttered windows. Looking around, Elayna only saw 2 other stone structures. Both were derelict.
"I was going to take a room in the old Fire Inn while we build ourselves a hut. Is Dolthric still running it?"
"No, he died a few years back of flagged lung. His son Gwindle took over and is doing well enough to satisfy the occasional merchant. He'll appreciate any coin you have. If you need a hut, we have enough that are empty. Take your pick. All you need to do is check the wattle, replace the thatch, and inspect the roof beams for rot."
He looked down at Elayna and swept his arm across the village.
"Let's choose our new home."
Over the coming days, Elayna learned Murgathwin was not typical of the village. Several times she heard her father growl about hopeless cases or broken men and women. His frustration grew.
"They have their own fears,"
Murgathwin reassured him.
"Your arrival is a bit of a shock to everyone, a shock they all needed."
She was right. For the first time in years, the villagers were confronted by the idea that someone wanted to live in Blackstone, and it gave the hardier folk a new optimism. Toothly, the bean farmer, was a boyhood friend of Hal's and brought his son the owl to help. Others joined in. Dugain, the beekeeper, Hanley the smith, Ulthwin the potter, and her husband, Bulray the carpenter, all gave their time generously. Their chosen hut overlooked the river and ford. It was medium-sized and not as run down as many others, making it fixable before Usfuel, the soul-wind, announced the arrival of winter with her keening cry and bitter gales. Ulthwin was particularly expert at thatching, and Elayna enjoyed spending time with her. Together they scoured the banks for suitable reeds and bundled them for the new roof. There were children of her age, but they were all hard at work, so it took time to get to know them. There was Niall, of course, Godrin, the fisherman's son, and Mikrig, whose older brother, Hunthrig, was often away stalking deer and snaring rabbits with their father, Gathlin Hunter. The game he and the other hunters brought back supplemented the little meat from the domestic sheep and cattle, which the villagers were loath to slaughter. It made them important, a fact that Mikrig took every chance to remind them of. Then there was Anya, Dugain's daughter, another willing pair of hands when she wasn't helping out at the mill. It was Anya who first told her about the miller's son. Caravin Miller was one of those her father called broken. He didn't even come to greet Hal when they'd first arrived. His wife, Geva, did, but only when she had heard that they had arrived from Duria.
"Tell me what the women are wearing,"
she asked Elayna after a brusque exchange of pleasantries. She suspected the miller's wife had already judged them to be a disappointment.
"Which women, Mistress Geva?"
It had been an honestly meant question. She had seen a variety of women working in the fields, trading in the towns, as well as officers' wives whose functions seemed purely decorative.
"The noblewomen, of course."
"Oh, they wear long gowns of light cotton from Jasfa. You wouldn't like them."
"And how would a silly girl like you know what I like?"
Elayna dropped her eyes, taken aback. She had thought the miller's wife a severe but sensible woman like Murgathwin.
"Sorry, Mistress Geva. They're not practical for a place like this."
The older woman rolled her eyes.
"What are you grinning at, freak?"
She snarled at a boy who had followed her into the village. Elayna had already guessed this was the miller's son, Luca, by his shock of wispy, ice-white hair. He was a wiry lad of average height and similar age to her. Geva grabbed him by the back of the neck and forcefully steered him away, but not before he winked back at her. The next time Elayna saw the boy, he was leading an ox-drawn cart laden with newly ground flour. She was bundling reeds with Anya while her father and Niall worked up above, securing them on the roof.
"Leusios!"
The beekeeper's daughter waved at him. He waved in reply.
"I'll make my delivery and come back."
"I thought his name was Luca."
"He was born with that name, but he prefers Leusios."
"Sounds more like a Durian name."
"Aye. His mother loves all things Durian and changed his name when she married his father. He prefers it."
"Really?" Niall had come down from the ladder to fetch another bundle of reeds. He was a likable lad, 5 years older than Elayna and growing into his prime. He held his arms out as they loaded him with finished bundles. "I'm amazed," he admitted. "I didn't know they could agree about anything."
"That, and only that,"
Anya laughed. When Leusios did return, he was drawing the same ox and cart, now loaded with several grain sacks for grinding. He beamed at Elayna. "Hello. I never got to ask your name."
"No time to chat,"
Hal called down gruffly.
"I want this roof finished before sunset."
"I'll help then," offered Leusios. There was a sudden yell, followed by more shouting upstream. It came to them as disjointed echoes caught in the high cliffs where the gorge opened up onto the rocky valley. Only the cemetery and the monastery lay that way. Long before the owners of the voices came into view, the huge teenage boy she had seen a couple of weeks before ran down the path on the far bank. He was wearing traveling leathers with a tremendous two-handed sword strapped to his back. He was red-faced, but not from the exertion of running, which clearly didn't bother him.
"Kerne!"
One of the monks came chasing around the bend in the path. The boy ignored him. When he did stop, it was at the crossroads. Onwards led downstream to the mill, but it was the trade road that he had considered, north up to the Traxian's Gate, the pass through the mountains and out to the vast steppes beyond, or south through the ford and into the village. Several people led by Hunthrig, with his brother Meekrig at his elbow, gathered where the trade road ran to the gravel of the ford.
"You're a fool for coming here without your brothers, Drethic, half-breed,"
he growled. Several cudgels had appeared. The boy stared at them coldly. Elayna felt her heart quicken. Her father, still up on his ladder, showed his soldier instincts by gripping his mallet, studying the standoff. One novice warrior monk with a greatsword against a gang with cudgels. There could be blood. Leusios's eyes flitted between the hunters and the teenage warrior, excitement and curiosity glittering in his blue eyes. Kerne's powerful physique tensed and his expression darkened into a glare that made several of the gang step back. Before she realized it, Elayna had raised her hands to her mouth and was holding her breath. Then the teenager turned on his heel and ran north up into the mountains, and out of their lives for the next 7 years.